So how about your storytelling capabilities, right? Look at your latest deck, look at your latest presentation that you've given, whether it's internally if you're a client-side researcher or whether it's to a client when you're an agency. And what grade would you give yourself? Well, let's explore a little bit of the opportunities about storytelling and whether that's actually an art form that you're never going to master anyway, or whether it's a science that you could significantly improve. To discuss that, I have three new distinguished guests. Kristen Luck, welcome.
Thank you.
You're a growth strategist.
Yep.
You're many things. And one of the things you do is also you provide the storytelling workshop for SMR, right?
Yes.
So you must know a lot about this. Simon Chadwick, you're here as editor-in-chief of Research World. We've met each other last year in this studio where I gave you a magic wand to change anything in the market research world. And I remember very vividly that you're very strong about if your research results don't make any impact, it's a waste of money, it's worthless, right? And I guess storytelling is a big part of that. And on the far end of the table, we have Rudy Nadilo. Welcome. You're the president of North America of the Prezi, which is obviously if you don't know it, it's a dashboarding company, right? You turn data into dashboards. So obviously all three of you have something with the topic of storytelling. So let's explore first storytelling. Is it an art or a science?
That's the subject, I think, of much debate in the industry.
Which side would you pick?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both.
I don't want a little bit of both. Pick a side.
I think there's some people that are innately great storytellers, like they get it. But I also think that it's teachable. So I think there's some science to it.
There's science
for sure. Yeah.
Simon, art or science?
It's teachable. There are people who are amazingly good at it and who are innate at it, but it is certainly teachable through the ability to utilize frameworks, and we do a lot of teaching on storytelling on the corporate side. But one thing that people don't realize is that we're all storytellers in our lives, in our private lives. Pretty much everybody, unless they're really, 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 very quiet.
Exactly.
Tell stories.
Okay.
So why be afraid of telling
internal
a story?
stories.
They're telling internal stories. So why be afraid of telling a story, publicly?
Rudy, what side would you pick on this one?
Well, I agree with Kristen. It's a little art and a little science because we're a software company, so clearly there's a science behind the software to allow you to do it. But one of the things we have to do with clients is consult with them on, you don't just replicate a PowerPoint deck. That is not storytelling. That's just mimicking, the old way of doing things. And the ability to put together the compelling story, what's the end result, where do you want to start, where do you want to weave somebody through, that's the art side. So the software helps you get there, but you do need people who are experts at putting that together. So it's a little of both.
A little of both. That's basically what all three of you are saying. But that doesn't matter because let's explore the science part of it for our viewers, right? Because apparently something here is teachable. But before we zoom into that, let us explore a little bit. Why is it so important? What is holding us back? If it's so natural, what keeps market researchers back from just doing it? Right?
Yeah.
What are they running against?
Well, from my perspective, I think, we kind of come up in the industry as analysts and we're taught to really pay attention to the charts and the data, and there's not been so much focus on the storytelling part of the business. Fast forward to 2016, and Cambiar actually put out a great report. It was last year at Congress, actually, that Simon highlighted it on the main stage, that storytelling now is the #1 skill valued by corporate side researchers. So there has been a real shift in terms of importance, and I think for a lot of people it's a struggle to figure out, well, how do I adapt to that new way of telling the story around data instead of just reporting facts and figures.
You use the word struggle. What makes it a struggle?
Well, I think it's about where market research has been in terms of the corporate structure and corporate importance.
Yeah.
So early on in our industry, we were consultants. We were the equivalent of McKinsey. And then it became bigger and bigger and bigger, and we became more and more tactical. And the more tactical we became, the more people were looking for those data capabilities. And there are people who are introvert, and they like to play with numbers and so on. And as long as nobody asks them to do anything that's embarrassing, like talking in public, they're fine.
Right.
Yeah.
But the more we're now being thrust back into the strategic side of things and being asked to be advocates rather than just reporters, the more we have to tell the story to get the research through to the C-suite in a form where they can take a decision. And if you're going to get a CEO to take a decision on the basis of research, that story better be compelling and very short. And so now you're asking the same people to revert to being extroverts and storytellers.
And short and to the point.
Yes,
and in 3 minutes get the whole research that they worked on for 3 years across the table.
So I agree with Simon that the getting to the shorter point is what the corporations want, but I see the real disconnect is that we just did a study. Agencies are saying that they want their PowerPoint decks, and the client wants a PowerPoint deck. You talk to the exact same client, and they say, I don't want a PowerPoint deck.
Right.
I want to have a dashboard. So there's a fundamental disconnect, and I've struggled with this. And I think you have, to your point, you have those, let's say, middle level research managers who are so comfortable in their zone of charts and tables and controlling the information, afraid to democratize the information and send it out. Yet you talk to their bosses, their CMOs or the VPs of research, they're wanting to embrace this, share it with the organization. So there's a little bit of an
organizational disconnect?
There's an organizational and old, set in your old ways. AOL is a client that I know is embracing democratization, and they're finding themselves liberated from not having to get all those calls. Run me across table, run this, run that. Let's get away from static reporting. So, there's a little bit of both.
It's not just a comfort zone, though, really. It's also, if I can use a technical term, it's CYA.
Of course.
In the mid-level, people are terrified that if they don't have all the information, somebody's going to ask them the one question they can't answer.
Right.
So they want that deck. But senior
Just
management, just wants tell me what to do, and tell me why.
But I think too that's kind of the nice thing about dashboards and KPIs these days, which is put a dashboard together, you have the most meaningful or most compelling points of data all in one place. And then the onus is on the researcher to really tell a story around that. I know there was just a report in Harvard Business Review, I think it was maybe a week or two ago, and it kind of talked about Unilever's CMI function.
Yep.
And one of the things they've really been focused more on is getting away from these like really data-intensive presentations and really focusing on more of the storytelling aspects, on more experiential presentations and TED-style talks. And that's a real shift, in skill set for researchers, I think.
So let's dive into this and explore this a little bit, because storytelling is not just getting rid of the decks, right? That would simplifying it too much.
Yes.
What is storytelling 101?
Yeah.
Where do we start?
Right. I mean, from my perspective, and these are sort of the key principles I teach during my storytelling workshops. Creating connection is a really important point that I feel like a lot of people kind of forget when they're going into a reporting or presentation experience. Like they don't take the time to connect with their audience before they kind of launch into like spewing out all the data. So that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, because they need it to be short, right? So we're not going to build a connection.
Right, and then the other two components that I really focus on are, really making something memorable. So how do you make that data presentation really memorable and really resonate with people? And then also how do you deliver meaning? Like what does it mean in the context of the research, and how do you tell a story in a way that the connection's made, that the data is memorable, and that it creates meaning for the organization.
Can we zoom in on that? What makes a presentation memorable? What tricks and hacks can we do to make that story much more stick?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of what I do is I use personalization tricks. So, some people are not that comfortable sharing personal stories about themselves or about their experiences. I am, and so I use that a lot. So creating meaning or memorability through a personalization or storytelling through that. I think really understanding your clients and their business and the history of their business is really important. It's really hard to create meaning sometimes around a particular study.
Yep.
But in the larger context of the organization and sort of what's been going on at the firm.
It's a stepping stone in a journey.
Yeah.
Would you say that as well as the key element, making it memorable?
Well, I think context is important. You mentioned context just now. We deal with researchers who just think in terms of survey data, yet they're sitting in a meeting, and let's say, some measure is going down, and somebody in the back of the room says, oh yeah, we cut our advertising spend last quarter, and somebody else says, oh, there was a problem with the product, and the social feeds were going crazy. And if you don't have that context, so on one level there's storytelling for maybe a one-off presentation. On the other level, if you have tracking information, you want the context of having your survey data with your marketing data, your sales, your shipments, your social media. And that also tells a story. So there's many levels to storytelling.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But let's go back just to storytelling 101 again. I mean, think about any story, and you know, there are probably only 7 stories in humanity. It's, you know,
the
all
archetypes.
It's
Right.
archetypes,
Right.
exactly. But first of all, you create a situation, your context.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time, then you build up tension.
Yep.
Then you relieve that tension. Then you build that tension up again, and then you relieve it, and then you build it until you get to a satisfying conclusion, or not.
Yeah.
You know, depending on how twisted the author is. But
Very in some cases.
In some cases. So when we're teaching storytelling in the research context, that is exactly what we do. We say, all right, so take the situation, tell everybody why you're here, what the situation is, then create tension. What's the problem? Then resolve that problem. Show them how that works. Then create the next problem and the next piece of tension.
Yeah.
Resolve that. So you're not just following the deck or the data or whatever.
Or
you're
the
actually
research process.
sculpting.
Right.
Yeah, you're
Right.
sculpting a story.
I call it the hook and the link. How do you draw people in, and then how do you link it to what you're trying to convey?
Hooks and links.
So, hooks and links.
Do we say we're watching this and we're convinced? Okay, you got me. Make it more memorable. Get story archetypes in. What are great sources of examples or inspiration? Where can people turn to? Actually, do you have a personal example of someone who's a really great storyteller in market research and how they did it?
Yeah. Gosh, I think there's so many great stories in market research. What I do a lot is I look outside the industry for really great storytelling examples. So, for instance, I read a lot. I know Ray Pointer always tells me not to tell people to read because nobody reads anymore. But I do a lot of reading, and actually, I had the pleasure of seeing Paul Smith speak at the MRIA conference a few years ago, and he literally all he does is write books on selling through storytelling, communicating through storytelling. He has a new book out called Lead with a Story, and it's all about using storytelling from a sales perspective. But I think he's a really great thought leader in terms of like how do you craft stories in a really meaningful way. And I think the same principles that he kind of espouses for sales work great in research as well.
All right. Yeah. So look into other industries. Where would you look for examples? Or do you know a great example that people could look up?
In storytelling in this industry, there are lots, and many actually are from previous generations, unfortunately.
What are you saying, Simon?
Well, apart from Kristen, of course, But
what are you saying, Simon? No, literally. What do you mean with that?
Well, I think it goes back to the context again. that research for a long time was kind of suppressed, and is only now bubbling up. But so I'll give you an example. He's a Brit. He's a guy called Julian Bond, one of the most brilliant researchers I've ever met. He can see maths spatially in 3D.
Okay.
He's an amazing statistician, and he's one of the world's greatest storytellers. You put that all together, and he can show a board of directors in 30 seconds exactly what they've got to do.
Yeah.
And he's got the data to back it all up. So those types of people, unfortunately, are relatively rare. And one of the things that Paul Hunter at Dunnhumby said a few years ago, and I think it's still right today, is that data scientists are not very good storytellers.
Yeah.
So you've actually got some mate storytellers with data scientists in many ways.
Which is fascinating because one of the easiest ways, I don't know, I feel like data scientists are sort of naturally good at digging in and finding like unique and unusual things, which make the best stories. So one of my favorite storytellers too is Richard Feynman, who's a physicist, but he wrote a couple books, The Pleasure of Finding Things Out, and kind of how to look at things from different perspectives, which is really what data scientists do. So you would think we would be better storytellers than maybe what we are,
Yeah.
And really,
I would think some of the best examples is what I see our clients doing, which is either customer journey or path to purchase. So people are struggling with trying to get information up to the C-suite. We know the attention span is small. You don't want to just put a couple of bullets anymore. And we have a client, for example, that works with sports teams. They have a whole path to purchase from when you pull into the parking lot, right on through when you leave the game, and everything happens at in between, including going to the bathroom and getting a hot dog and what was the usher like. And there's just a whole path you can follow, and anybody can read that. Anybody can instantly understand what's happening in that particular arena or a particular store or whatever it might be. So I find those examples are some of the best ones because they telegraph the information almost instantly. You don't have to know that business to instantly know what's going on.
So I think that summarizes our key learning and key takeaway for our viewers. Context with a capital C, right? Because again, this is an example.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
that context is not just context as an abstract thing, it's a journey.
Yeah.
Right.
What you're talking about is a journey, what you're talking about is a journey in terms of whether the company or whatever.
Yeah.
So if we can take anything away from this, I think what you're all saying is go find the journey that this research fits in.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what we need to tell.
A journey, a series of twists and turns.
Exactly.
You know,
and then
whatever
here's
it
my
may be.
research, which is the next step or the next crossing point or the next whatever, right?
Well, you know, in marketing they say content is king, so maybe in research it's context is
Let's
king.
say
Yeah.
journey.
I think
Journey
you
is
just
king.
got it.
We did it, right?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Kristen. And that kind of brings us to the end. And I think that's a great learning. I hope you found that a great learning. Let us know if you want. #IsamarTV. Kristen, we'll see you back in this studio tomorrow.
Yep.
We're going to talk about women in research.
Yep.
Simon, we see you a lot because you're chairing session. And I'll see you back later today in our client side piece where we talk about the study about applying research again.
Yep.
And Rudy, thank you very much for being with
Thank
us
you.
here.